all the things that are happening in the criminal justice system and some of the outrageous things that you see around the country. This week, we want to start off talking about parole boards. I know, Ray, you're not a fan of the whole system, and yeah, I get it. When you look at all the opportunities people who are convicted have of not going to jail, and then even once they're put there, the chances they have to get out, you know, it's nuts. But talk a little bit first about the parole board system, how it works. And I don't think people totally understand the deal with how parole boards work.
Well, in Kentucky, the parole boards are appointed by the governor, and they consider parole applications by people that are prison inmates.
So once you've been convicted of a crime and you're sentenced to life, okay, and you're sent to prison, after a certain period of time, you become eligible
to be considered for parole.
And then so the prisoners would apply for parole.
No, they're sent to the parole board for a hearing.
And I guess there's a formula to where, like, if you've killed someone, how long it is before they'll let you go before the parole board versus if you're there for I don't know, a drug crime or burglary. They've got some kind of formula, or is it the same for everyone? Do you know?
For Class D felons, you have to serve 15% of your crime. Anything over that is 20%.
Okay.
And if it's a violent crime, you have to serve 85%.
Okay.
Now, as everybody who listens to this show knows, that we're in a big rush to release prison inmates because our leaders in Frankfurt have decided we can't afford to keep people incarcerated in prison. And so what they're doing is they're doing everything they can to release people. And the parole board is the way that it occurs.
Okay.
Now, and it's a surprise to most people. Because here's the statement. The parole board is really the body that determines how long a person is sentenced for a crime. Now, I'll try a case, and we'll get a conviction, let's say, and the person gets a 5-year sentence. Then, and if it's a Class C felony, let's manslaughter second, a vehicular homicide case, and he gets 5 years. Then, at the end of 20 months, which is how long? 1 year, they're eligible to be considered for parole, you see. Now, if they get 5 years from a jury, then a judge sentences them to 5 years in prison, right? Then they go to the parole board at the end of a year, and the parole board will then decide whether they serve 5 years or do they make parole and get out of prison.
And that's, of course, assuming the judge hasn't given them shock probation.
Right.
So the first opportunity is the judge just gives them shock probation after 2 months, but let's assume that for whatever reason that judge doesn't do that. Now, a year later, into their 5-year sentence, voila, they go before the parole board.
Okay.
Now, what happens at the parole board? How does it work?
Well, what they do in cases in which there's a victim issue, for example, or vehicular homicide example that I've given you, they have a victim's hearing, and they notify the family members of all of the victim, and they're allowed to come to the parole board and share some information about the victim, and basically to ask the parole board to continue the imposition of the sentence that they got from the judge.
Okay, so the family gets an invite with the person that killed their loved one, their daughter, in the car wreck. The family gets a letter that says, hey, if you want to come to the parole board and beg us to keep this person in prison, here's your chance. And you're going to, did they have to face this person again? Is this person at the parole hearing too?
Not at that point,
okay,
but they talk to the defendant the next day.
Okay, so you've got to basically go before the parole board and say, please, please keep this person that killed my daughter in prison. You got to relive what you've gone through again.
That's right.
And hope and hope and pray that they will give you the justice that the jury gave you. Now you're just hoping that they'll let that justice prevail.
That they'll let that stand.
Okay.
And you also got this sort of rush to release pressure coming from the other direction on the parole board, you see. Mm-hmm. Now, the Kentucky Parole Board, just recently, the percentage of people they meet for the first time, the defendants they meet for the first time, 73% of those people are paroled.
So that's on the increase.
That's pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, you can only conclude that that's how they're going about the process of releasing people from prison. So I went to a parole hearing, a victim's hearing of a case that our office prosecuted. Shauna Kinser prosecuted it, and I went to the parole hearing for the victims. And you know, every time I go, I just get upset. And I don't know why I go, because it just really tears me up to watch family members basically showing pictures of their loved one, in this case their daughter, who was deaf and had been a success story and was killed in a car crash, driven by her husband. Mm-hmm. And he pled guilty. He pled guilty to 5 years in prison. Mm-hmm. And here we are 10 months after that at a parole hearing. So I listened to all of that, and finally they asked me if I wanted to say anything, and I said, well, I do. And I always worry about what I say at these things, because I'm just offended that we go through this process that we've described of 5 years, and the judge sentences the person 5 years. And in 10 months, I'm listening to family members basically beg the parole board to keep in place this 5-year sentence. And I just stood up and said, this is not the way it's supposed to be. This is, and was pretty upset about the idea that this is what's going on, and wondered if the message of the parole board was going to be that you drink, drive, and kill someone, and that person's life is worth 10 months of the defendant's life. And I said, if that's the message you want to send, then parole him. But if it's not, then you need to let him serve more time. And then the next day they go talk to the defendant. And guess what? The defendant was talking, of course, about how changed he is, and he says, I'm not really an alcoholic, and I've been through AA meetings, and somebody asked him, well, what's the first step in the 12-step program? And guess what?
He didn't know.
He didn't know. So, at any rate, he got flopped or given 24 months more to serve. And
in 24 months, the family will have to come back again and beg. And this also applies to rape cases, folks. You know, where rape victims have to go back before the parole board.